Welcome to the Wheats on Your Mind podcast. My name is Aaron Harries. Wheats on Your Mind is brought to you by the Kansas Wheat Commission and Kansas Association of Wheat Growers. On this episode of the podcast, our guest is Jason Scott. Jason is a sixth-generation farmer from Hurlock, Maryland, where they farm 1,500 acres. Walnut Hill Farms produces corn, soybeans, malted barley, and sweet corn. He farms alongside his parents, Doug and Patty, and he also is a certified Pioneer seed dealer. Outside of service on the Maryland Grain Producers Board, Jason also serves on the U.S. Wheat Associates Board. From 2016 to 2017, Jason chaired the U.S. Wheat Associates Board and has traveled to more than 20 countries representing U.S. wheat farmers. Jason, thanks for being on the podcast.
Thanks for having me. Good morning.
Maybe first you can familiarize us with a little bit about your geography and where you're located there on the Delmarva Peninsula.
Sure. So first off, we don't exactly identify as New England. We like to say we're a little more southern than that. So we call ourselves the Mid-Atlantic. My farm is located in Maryland. I'm on the eastern shore, so between the bay and the ocean. We are, if you're familiar with where Delaware comes down and makes the right angle at the bottom, we're like 8 miles from that little corner there, to put it almost exactly. So we're about an hour from the ocean and probably about 30 minutes from the beach, 30 minutes from the bay, but with all kinds of rivers and lakes and streams and things like that in between as well.
How would you describe your climate?
Humid would be the number one descriptor, but we're I'd say moderate. I mean, we especially when it comes to crop diseases, we do sometimes experience northern diseases. We'll get northern corn leaf blight occasionally. We do sometimes get southern, so we'll get southern rust. We'll get some of the things that are more, I guess, subtropical diseases. So the university, I guess the disease specialists at the university say they love to work in the Mid-Atlantic because they get an opportunity to see just about every disease. We're relatively rainy. We get about 40 inches of rain a year. Seems like year over year we're getting more and more big storms, 3-4 inches at a time, instead of getting more timely a half inch to an inch, every other week or something like that. So that's been something we've had to deal with. But I think humid is probably the number one thing that people say when they come visit Maryland.
I suppose you're susceptible to both hurricanes and nor'easters?
We are. We do get both. Knock on wood, we've been relatively lucky with hurricanes. We've had a few near misses over the past few years. No real major damage for quite some time. We have had a couple not real big nor'easters here this winter. We did have, I guess it was about 8 to 10 inches of snow with some ice about 2.5 weeks ago. And then another one we had actually back in January that hung around for quite some time. We had about an inch and a half of ice on top of some snow, and that was a mess. That one did not go away for very long. We normally get some snow, and then within 3 or 4 days it's gone. We're not used to having white on the ground for months like we have this year.
Give a rundown of your calendar cropping year. Just go season by season and tell us what it kind of looks like when you plant, when you harvest.
Sure. So I'll base this off of wheat. So we grow soft red winter here in Maryland, and some people have dabbled in some other classes of wheat. There's been some hard red winter tried. Didn't typically have the disease resistance that we need, but we plant our soft red winter typically early to mid-October, somewhere around the 10th to 15th of October. That then goes dormant throughout the winter, and then actually just this week I would be getting started on the first shot of fertilizer. We typically put 2 shots of fertilizer on. And in Maryland, we're regulated on when we can apply fertilizer. So we can't put anything on before March 1st unless the growing degree days say that we can get out there a little bit earlier, and the university tracks that. So some years it's February 15th, but the standard is March 1st. And then we'll harvest that crop typically mid-June. The goal when I was a kid was always to get done by 4th of July. If we could get done the wheat harvest and get the double crop beans in by 4th of July, everybody was super happy. We have had, it seems like a little bit, I think the varieties are getting a little bit earlier in maturity, but then we are also really focusing on getting that wheat in between the 10th and 15th of October as much as we can. And I think that helps as well, getting it harvested a little bit earlier. The past couple of years we've been probably done getting all the beans and everything in by the 22nd or 23rd of June, which has been great for family time on 4th of July, but but also we've been able to grow much better soybeans after our wheat as well.
Your wheat cycle sounds very Kansas-like. I'll have to check later if we're on the same latitude as Maryland. Might be. So you did mention the regulation of fertilizer application. I wanted to ask you about that. If you're in a tougher regulatory environment there, being where you're located in the mid-Atlantic and closer to urban areas, what kind of challenges do you face with that?
I mean, we've had mandatory nutrient management in Maryland since like the late 90s. So that was actually predated me being back on the farm. But the biggest thing is we'd have to have a nutrient management plan, and we have to follow that plan. For wheat specifically, you're limited to 1 pound of nitrogen per expected bushel of yield. Now, they do allow you to use a best 3 of the last 5 years average for your yield expectation. So it doesn't completely limit you on your yield because if you have a bad year, you get to kick those couple bad years out. So that does help. There are some other little loopholes, I guess. You can get yourself up to about 1.2 pounds of N per bushel on wheat. But the regulatory environment is certainly a little more stringent than most places. But, we're, 26, 27, 28 years in now. And we found ways to work with it, work around it, and still, push our crops and continue to increase our yields.
Do they enforce that? Do you get audited? Do you have to submit a written plan?
Well, you don't have to submit your written plan. Every year, at the end of the year, you have to submit an annual implementation report, and that breaks down each crop separately, and then that does break down total pounds of N, P, and K. So it's not down to the field level or the acre level on that report that we have to send in, but then you're subject to enforcement where they'll come out and do an audit randomly. Well, they say it's random. I feel like I get one every other year. But once you get one and pass, you get 3 free years with no audits. So yeah, they do come out and enforce that. And my main operation, and then I have a couple cousins and things like that have separate operations that I'm certified to write the nutrient management plans for ourselves. So I wind up getting in on their audits as well. So it seems like there's almost one every year. We've got 4 different operations that I'm working with.
Let's go back to production. So tell us about what your yield expectations are every year.
We average about 90 on our ground, and I have, as wheat prices have been low the past few years, I've been really focusing on putting wheat on our best wheat ground. So that has increased our yields dramatically over probably the last 5 years. We hit, I think 120, 125 was the highest we've ever had for like a whole farm average. That was 2 years ago. Last year we were right around 100, so we had a pretty good year last year. But like I said, I'm taking out some of our sandier ground that is really better suited to the barley. The barley is new as of like 4 or 5 years ago, and that's been able to kind of put the barley on the sandier ground or the lesser soil and put the wheat on the better ground and do a little bit better with both, actually.
So what are the delivery outlets for your wheat and your barley?
The barley is all contracted to a specific craft malter that is over in Laurel, Delaware. So it's about a half hour, 45 minutes from the farm. So that all goes to them unless it doesn't make malt grade, and then it just goes into feed. So that would go to the chicken industry. Wheat for us, the big buyers on the shore are all the chicken industry. We have very little, private companies or private co-ops or anything like that, unless you are going up to the flour mills in southeastern Pennsylvania. So for my crop specifically, about half goes to the chicken industry. The other half I store in my bins, and then that gets pulled out sometime between July and August and goes up into the flour mills in Pennsylvania. So I contract with a grain dealer up there, and he picks it up on my farm and hauls it up there.
Oh, very interesting. The chicken industry there, are you familiar with the rations? So how much of their ration is that soft red winter wheat?
So I'm somewhat familiar. I can't say I'm an expert by any means, but I have talked to their head nutritionist for Purdue Farms, which is the primary one that we deal with. They prefer to use 0. So when the price is right, of course, they will blend a little bit in, but they much prefer corn and or sorghum to putting wheat in that ration. So they're exporting some, and then they are also just essentially storing some, and it eventually makes its way up to Pennsylvania as well.
Wow. So does any of that chicken manure find its way back to your farm?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, that's what we're doing as we speak. That's regulated. March 1st is the day we can start. on March 1st, the whole community smells like chicken manure for a few weeks while everybody's getting it spread. I have a few landlords that have chicken houses. So those landlords, I pay them a little bit for the manure, and then I pay for the company that comes in and cleans that out and hauls it to the field. And then we also, I have a contract with some other guys that do clean outs that I import manure from them as well.
Yeah, my brother's doing the chicken manure thing right now. So yeah, the neighbors appreciate that too. But it's gold stuff though, isn't it?
It is. I mean, there's no more complete fertilizer, and a lot of the environmentalists in the Bay watershed would like to see us ship it all out of here or use it for something else and not a land application. But you get organic matter, you get all the micronutrients and everything else that are in it. And I always say, it's locally grown, locally produced organic fertilizer that, we can throw right on the field just from the chicken house right next door. So it certainly makes sense.
So a little bit more on markets. I think our listeners would be curious to know about your other crops, your corn, soybeans. What happens to that when you're harvested?
I'm not going to say 100%, but very close to 100% of the corn grown in Maryland goes directly to the chicken industry. We are typically a corn deficit, but between Maryland and the Delaware Eastern Shore area, we're a corn deficit area. So they've got to bring corn in just to keep the chicken industry fed. The soybeans, we have a local crush plant about 45 minutes from the farm. So those primarily get crushed there. I grow anywhere from 75 to 100% Plenish high oleic soybeans. So those are an IP product and I have to keep separate, and those get a little bit of a premium as well over the standard soybean market. So that meal then goes back into the chicken industry. The oil, of course, goes to all different industries, but a lot of the Plenish actually is going to that southeastern Pennsylvania, which is a big area for snack foods and things like that.
I'm curious on your area, like it's an older part of the country, and how long have some of the farms you farm been in the hands of some of the families of your landlords?
Gosh, I know there's some, not my own, but some other producers around that are over 200, 250 years.
Wow. Our
family, we just got our first century farm probably 6 or 7 years ago. So my great-grandfather purchased this farm back in the early 1920s, since purchased a couple other farms around it. So it's a block of about 640 acres total, which for Maryland, in one block is really, really big. So that was our first for our family. But we've got a lot of ground that we've been tilling for 70 to 80 years. My father's side of the family were sharecroppers. And then my grandfather on that side was the first one to buy any land. And I actually purchased that farm from him back about 6 or 7 years ago. And then my father has really been the one that has really increased the purchasing of land and not just renting from others.
I imagine land values are pretty high. How do you handle urban encroachment? Is that a concern on the peninsula there? I know you're about 60 miles straight southeast of D.C. as a crow flies, but I suppose you have some opportunities and challenges presented by how close you are to urban areas.
We probably don't deal with it as much as the guys that are on the other side of the bay that are, right, next to the city. But there's a lot of people. You wouldn't believe how many people. And I live in Talbot County, which is a little bit north of Dorchester, which is where our farm is. You wouldn't believe how many people live in Talbot County and commute to D.C. or Baltimore every day. House values, and especially anything that's waterfront, are through the roof because there's so much demand for, people just want to get outside of the city and live somewhere where it's quiet. What they don't realize is the more of them that are here, the less quiet it is. But land values overall, good irrigated farmland is in the 10 to 12,000 an acre range of things that have been sold recently. Dry land can really vary, at 6,000, 7,000, something like that, and all dependent on if you could put an irrigation on it. Over the last 10 years, they've popped up, pivots have popped up in almost every little nook and cranny that, if you can get water, you put a pivot up, because we're really sandy. So I should go back to that a little bit. We do get 40 inches of rain, but the saying in Hurlock, which is where our home farm is we're always 3 days from a drought. So, with dry land corn, we're looking at about 125 bushels to the acre. Irrigated, we're disappointed if we don't average 250.
I assume the irrigation is all groundwater.
For the most part, yeah, there is a little bit of streams and rivers, but you got to watch saltwater intrusion on those acres. So they have to be pretty far upstream to be able to pull out of a river.
Has the government been able to keep your property taxes in check as far as agriculture value for land?
Yes, actually, believe it or not, I don't want to speak too loud in case there's any county councilmen or anything like that listening that have a budget crunch, but we get a really good tax rate for ag land. Just for instance, I mean, I own one farm that's about 180 acres, and the taxes on that are just over $1,000 a year. So we are lucky. Now, on the housing side, that's a whole different story, but for the land, we're still in good shape.
So does the opportunity present itself to do some education with all the urban neighbors you have?
Absolutely. So it's funny you asked that, because this afternoon, or actually this morning, in about an hour and a half, I am speaking on a panel to a garden club. So it's a garden club in Talbot County, which is the one that I told you is full of DC and urbanites that find their way down here. And a lot of them in the garden club are retired. So, they retire down here where it's quieter and much better living than living on the streets of DC. So there's three other farmers, one who is organic, and then two that, grow row crops just the same way I do. And we're speaking on a panel to just help educate. I mean, these people really have no idea what goes on the farm that is next door to their house. And I spend more time in Annapolis than I would like, which isn't that often, but I've been on the Maryland Grain Producers since I got out of college as some kind of representative. And I got a chance is probably not right, but I was coerced to go testify on a neonicotinoid ban this year. And again, I mean, these people have absolutely no idea what they're talking about. They get information from one anti-chemical group, and they feel like that's gospel without trying to listen to the other side of the story.
Do you find when you have a group to your place like you will today that they're pretty receptive to what you have to say?
Most of the time, they are blown away by some of the things we're doing. I mean, we had a little pre-meeting to come up with some topics for what we're doing today with a couple of the people that are leading up the committee, and both of them are beekeepers. And we talked about the neonicotinoid thing, and I explained that, it's a seed treatment, and it's going into a sealed planter box and then going and I was speaking specifically to corn, but planted 2 inches deep under the soil, and that neonic is gone in 30 days after planting. So there's no flowers. There's nothing that bees are going to get into. And I understand the dusting off at planting with air planters, with modern seed treatments and the polymers we have today. That's not happening anywhere near what it was maybe 10, 15 years ago when neonics were introduced. So just that example, they were both blown away by how it's actually used. They see a crop duster flying over top of their beehives and spraying neonics everywhere, and that's just not happening.
Well, let's talk a little bit about your time with U.S. Wheat Associates. You were chair of the board, as I mentioned, in 16 and 17, so not a lot of your wheat get exported, but you clearly understand the value of the export industry for U.S. wheat.
Absolutely. I always say, and this comes up almost every Maryland Grain Producers funding meeting, because, we're funding an organization that primarily focuses on exporting and marketing wheat overseas, and very little of ours is exported. But, a rising tide does really lift all ships. And when hard red winter goes up, soft red winter goes up, and any wheat that we can get out of this country is helping the supply and demand picture here, and hopefully can help our price. So I had the opportunity to travel with U.S. Wheat in 2012 on a board team trip to Africa. And on that trip, it opened my eyes to what the organization really does overseas. And I was absolutely blown away. Much like the Garden Club members, learning about neonics, I had no clue the relationships that our employees have overseas with mill managers and the guys that are actually importing the wheat and things like that. Going on that trip really made me interested in getting more involved with U.S. Wheat. A few years later, the officers were kind of talking to me about running, and I decided I'd throw my name in the hat.
So how many different countries have you been to?
Gosh, with U.S. Wheat, I think it's up to 20, 22, something like that. And the entire Midwest, I had driven across the country with my family when I was in the 8th grade. But I think now from Texas to North Dakota and out to Washington, I've hit just about every state there. as well, whether it's going to a state commission meeting or going to one of the U.S. wheat meetings. So it's been a great opportunity for me to learn about how other people farm, to meet some really impressive leaders, to meet people like Harries from Kansas, and get to hang out with Justin Gilpin a little bit. So it's been an amazing opportunity. So if anybody's listening that has any interest in getting on the Kansas Wheat Commission and moving on to one of the national boards, I would highly recommend it.
Thanks for that plug. Let's take a little sidebar here. Speaking of international travel, you recently took a trip to Mexico at a really unfortunate time. Tell us about that.
I did. So you mentioned that I'm a Pioneer salesman, and they have something called the Pace Setters Club, and there's certain metrics we have to hit to get in the club, and you get an international trip, as well as some other marketing materials and things like that if you make it. So our trip this year was to Puerto Vallarta. That was about 2.5 weeks ago now. Went down there on a Thursday. Everything was great. We had our business meeting. We were hanging out by the pool. My wife and I, Saturday all day, were getting notifications about flight cancellations because of snow. And we woke up Sunday morning to the airport is shut down. Don't leave the hotel because of cartel activity. So we were very fortunate to be with this Pioneer Corteva group. It was about 700 of us. We had the entire hotel. They had travel agents there. They also had, a lot of, Pioneer and Corteva staff, as well as our meeting planners. Those folks worked, I don't know if 24/7, but they worked basically around the clock to try and figure out how to get out of there. We were to leave Sunday night, and we wound up leaving Tuesday. A lot of indecision, a lot of uncertainty. We woke up Tuesday morning to a message saying we're leaving at 3, and then within a half hour it was changed to 8. Then it was, my wife and I were actually standing in the ocean having a drink, and then they said, well, you got to be in the lobby in an hour. So they wound up actually chartering 3 big commercial planes to get all 700 of us out of there. Now, we were on the first one. They kind of put anybody that had young kids at home and things like that to get back to on the first one. Then the next 2 left the next day, but flew us into Minneapolis and put us up in a hotel, and we got an email that night with what our flights home would be. So it was interesting. You had to be on your toes. As far as cartel activity, we were safe in the hotel. I think there were some roadblocks and things like that about 2 miles from us, so we were a little bit south of town. Then on the way to the airport, we did see probably 15 to 20 burnt out buses that had been used as roadblocks, buildings that were burnt out and things like that. But it really seemed like the people in town were kind of getting back to normal. The people were walking up and down the street. There were Army vehicles and things like that in multiple locations on the way to the airport. But it was a little bit scary. It was a little bit of anxiety and uncertainty about when you're going to be able to leave. My biggest hardship was I almost ran out of contacts, which, that wouldn't have been the end of the world. But
hard to drive home without those. Yeah,
exactly. I mean, we weren't like confined to the room and needed to be barricaded or anything like that. We still got to hang out with the people we were with, just a couple extra days of it. It was fine, but certainly a story to tell.
Well, hats off to Corteva. Sounds like they took really good care of you.
They did. Yeah, kudos to them for sure.
So, Jason, tell us where your options are for wheat varieties, as far as public varieties and private varieties. What's your choice?
So we are pretty much, I'm not going to say limited, but we are pretty much, our whole area is buying private varieties. Many of the public varieties wind up getting sold to a private variety, private company, whether it's USG or some smaller local companies, and Pioneer as well. So most of what we grow in this area, I'd say probably between 80 and 90% is private varieties. Now, there has been some talk recently with patented varieties and our cover crop program being so strong. There's at least a third to half of Maryland ground gets cover crop in the winter, and most of that is wheat. And, technically, you can't save patented varieties to use for that. So there's been some talk, and we've invested some funds into the Maryland breeding program to come up with some public varieties that, specifically for that purpose, a guy could grow 50 to 100 acres of it and then use it as his cover crop and not have to worry about the gray area of planting private varieties on cover crop land.
Sounds like disease package is probably a priority when you're picking.
Absolutely. So I'm not going to say we 100% go to a disease package, but scab is our number one disease we're looking to fight. As I'm sure all the producers that are listening know, there is no silver bullet, whether it's genetics or putting a fungicide on. But all of the companies that are breeding wheat for this area are trying to increase their scab tolerance. Is probably their number one thing, while maintaining, at least close to top end yields.
Jason, thanks for joining us. Really appreciate the perspective. Good luck with your garden club, and thanks for being an advocate for wheat. Thanks.
I appreciate being on, and looking forward to seeing you here in the near future.
Okay. Thanks, Jason.
Thank you.
My thanks to Jason Scott for joining me on this episode of the Wheats on Your Mind podcast. If you have any follow-up questions for Jason on this episode, or if you have any topics you'd like to suggest for future episodes, please email us at kswheat@kswheat.com. Thanks for listening.